Laughter is the only thing that'll keep you sane. And this world is crying more and more every day. Don't let evil get you down in this madness spinning round and round. I want you to live forever underneath the sky so blue. I want you to live forever underneath the sky so blue.
All right, we're going to start a new series here today, and it's called Helping the Next Gen Win. It's a three-part series, so the next 3 weeks, counting today, we will be discussing this. We'll be talking about this. I think it's going to be really good for us. But the first thing we need to do is kind of talk about something we call the generations, right? We got to talk about the generations, and if you've done any generational studies, you already get a lot of this stuff. I'm just going to very quickly go through a couple of things. First of all, the generation that we're going to start with is called the greatest generation. It's called the greatest generation. We have a picture kind of depicting that, right? Anybody disagree? Greatest generation? Anybody? No? Okay, good, because you probably get hurt. Someone would get really offended at you. The greatest generation is a generation that saw a lot of hardship, and it needed to rally, and it needed to rally against a common enemy. And in an era that was really difficult, in an era of not extra like we have now, in an era of minimalism in a lot of ways, in an era of valuing different things that some of us would like to get back to, some of us are like, I'm not sure. That's called the greatest generation because they rallied and they overcame a lot of adversity. And the next generation we want to talk about is the baby boomers. And you know what happened is they all came back from the war, and then this happened. They all reunited with their families, and there was an explosion of population. That's why it's called the baby boomers. Seriously, that's exactly why it's called the baby boomers, because they were a direct result. The population explosion was a direct result of that kind of coming back together from the greatest generation. And then we have the next generation called Gen X, right? And this kind of depicts Gen X. This is like kind of over culture saturated, branding, all this kind of stuff, pop culture crazed generation, just obsessed with toys, apparently, and video games and that sort of thing, kind of the first generation to kind of get obsessed with that stuff. And then you have the millennials, right? And this depicts the millennials, right? Any of you ever done that? Anybody? No? Sure you haven't. I could probably go on Facebook and find it right now. So we have the millennials, right? And then we have Gen Z, right? Generation Z. And that's a baby if you didn't understand. That's a baby, and that's exactly what the smallest kids, we have a couple kids in wombs around here right now, and that's going to be them in a few months here. They're going to be holding iPhones. They won't know what's going on, but they'll know how to operate that thing better than you do in 2 years. And that's just the generation. That's what's just going on right now. But here's the thing. There's a lot of discussion around generationalism, around, entitlement, around all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of mean things we can say about different generations, or critiques we can give of the different generations. But here's the thing. We're not here to do that today, okay? We're here because we want the next generation to win. We want the next generation to win. And you want your kids to win, you want your grandkids to win, you want your great-grandkids to win. You want the next generation to be better off than you were in some ways. You just do. That's just part of life. So I've heard it said before, you rise or fall on your definitions. And so we need to define this question. Who is the next gen? Who's the next gen? Who's the next gen? And so you'd be like, well, it's Gen Z, right? It's like the newest one, right? Well, yes, but I'm going to define the next gen as this. Anyone who is coming behind you. Anyone who is coming behind you. Anyone who's coming after you. And it doesn't have to be age specific. It can be season of life. It could be that you're married and you know someone who's single and they're about to be married. Well, they'll come in behind you, right? And you've got some things, you've got some wisdom, you've got some thoughts, you've got some ideas on things that can help them in that first season of marriage. Or maybe you got 40 years under your belt, married. Well, that's going to help somebody who's 30 years under their belt, or 20 years under their belt, or 15, or 10, or 5. That's going to help other people, the things that you have to say. Some of you have been through a marriage and divorce, and now a marriage again, right? And you may have some things to help some people understand how not to end that first marriage, or how to operate so that it doesn't go in the same direction. You've got some wisdom to share. So the definition we're giving of next gen is anyone who is coming behind you or after you in a different season of life. And so here's the thing. What is a win then? What does the win equal? What can we count as a win for the next generation? Now, I'm going to give you some false definitions of winning, or some definitions that on their own are not really winning. But here's what we're taught to believe, and here's what culture tells us to believe about winning. Winning is a good education. Now, that's good, but that's not the ultimate win. It's a good job. It's a good house. It's a good spouse. It's good kids. It's another house. Maybe it's another spouse. That's what we're taught by culture. We try to trade up in things. And the last thing that we're taught by culture is he who dies with the most toys wins. And that's not exactly true, is it? Because we all have either been there, know someone who's been there, we're about to be there. You may have all the toys in the world, but if your relationships are not good, it doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter. We've all seen this, and in some deep level of quiet desperation in our souls, this isn't winning. All these things together isn't necessarily winning. Maybe they're accomplishments. Maybe some of them are things you should be proud of and you should work towards, yes, but it's not the ultimate win for the next generation, is it? So what we're going to say is winning is not improving a standard of living. It's just not. Winning is not giving the next generation a better standard of living. Though that's happened. A lot of generation after generation that's happened. But that's not the goal. I'm not against you and me improving our situation. I'm not against us improving our standard of living. I'm not against us improving our kids' standard of living. But here's the deal. We need to improve. This is the real win. We need to improve a standard for living. A standard for living, not of living. And we're going to kind of look at that a little bit today. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is to give you one idea from an ancient text found in the Old Testament. It's called Psalms. It's not Palms. It's Psalms, okay? And it's a text that if you find yourself with a physical Bible ever, it's kind of a relic nowadays, right? We're not sure if we can find them. They collect dust because we've all got them digitally, right? We've all got them on our phones and tablets. But if you have a physical Bible and you open that Bible, in the middle, you're going to find Psalms. Okay, so that's right in the middle of the collection of texts, but it's in the Old Testament. And we're going to look at Psalm 78. And it's one of the longest chapters of Psalms in the Old Testament. Psalm 119 is the longest. And the reason there are two parts of the Bible, if you're not real familiar with it all, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament testifies, it shows us, it tells us the history of Israel and God's chosen people, the ancient people through which Jesus was birthed, that gives us so much backstory of what's about to happen with Jesus. It's a fantastic resource to understand the context of a lot of what Jesus says, a lot of what his disciples say, a lot of what the conflict is in the New Testament between the Jewish people and the Greek people and all that kind of stuff. It's a great, great, great text that we should be familiar with. But it is what Jesus was birthed out of. And the New Testament testifies to that new Jesus movement, that new covenant with God, that new way that we can approach God with confidence through Jesus. And so we've got these two portions of the Bible. Now, the writer of Psalm 78, his name is Asaph. And Asaph lived at the same time as King David, if you're familiar with King David. David was the second king of Israel around 1000 BC, so that's 1,000 years before zero in our kind of timeline. He was in the court of King David, and Asaph is writing, and the nugget he's going to give us is in providing a standard for living. And he's right dead center in the collection of ancient texts that is bound together, the Bible. Now, here's what he said, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. He starts out with verse 1 of Psalm 78. He says, "O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things from of old." Now, I'm telling you today that I'm reading something written about 3,000 years ago, right? That's pretty old. And he's referring to even further back from that. So we could probably guess that he's referring back to like 3,200 or 3,300 or 3,400 years ago. Okay, so even though we're reading this, he's referring to things even older than the text that we're reading here today. We'll continue in verse 3. What we have heard, so he says, I will utter hidden things from of old, what we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us. What our fathers have told us. Now you can see in this culture, there's a tradition of fathers passing down what's happened, passing down information, passing down their wisdom, passing down the stories of what's happened to their people and their family. And for some of us, we need to pause right here because we're thinking, well, in my context, Dad was silent, so he didn't really say a whole lot because that's kind of the modern masculine man. In a lot of ways, he's just quiet, right? He's got a quiet confidence. He doesn't say much, but he's there, right? Or maybe in your context, there was no father, so he didn't really teach you much at all. He was just gone. Or maybe you had a father and you're thinking, I'm not sure what my father ever told me, but what he told me, I remember some of the things he told me, and they were not very positive, and they were negative, and they were about me. And so you're working through it, maybe to the point in your life where those are starting to resurface, and you're starting to think about the things your father said, because we all do that at some point in our life. You're starting to think about those things, you're starting to question those things, or you're starting to wrestle with those things, or you're starting to try to work through those things and understanding that your value is not completely found in the words of your earthly father. I don't know what your history is and your history with your father, but this isn't about our fathers necessarily. This is about the fathers that came for Asaph, and it's about all family members, really. Any family member or any person in your life that's extremely influential, any person in your life that is investing in you, that's sort of what he's talking about here. He continues in verse 4, we will not hide from their children, we will tell the next generation. So this whole series was kind of came out of this passage, to tell the next generation, to tell the people coming behind you. Now, before I show you what Asaph actually told them, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you tell? What do you pass down? What is the information? What is the story? What are the things that you are passing down to the next generation? And I'm talking like beyond like brush your teeth, say please, that kind of stuff, which comes out all the time. And that's good, and that teaches them to be nice and respectful and those sort of things, and those are necessary. But beyond the politeness, beyond just being a functional human being in today's society with the expectations we have, beyond learning how to use things properly, the tools at our disposal, beyond those kinds of things, what do you actually tell the next generation? And what's been told to you? Asaph said this is what our fathers have told us, and this is what we want to pass on to our next generation. Here's verse 4 again. We will not hide them from their children. What has happened? What has been told? We will not hide them. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. Now, let's stop for a moment because Asaph refers to the history of the nation of Israel here. He's referring to what has happened before his time. And here's a couple examples. God delivering the nation of Israel out of Egypt. God splitting the sea for them to walk through. Providing food for 40 years in a desert while they searched for their promised land. Providing water, splitting rocks open so that they could drink in the desert. Now, some of you may not consider yourself much of a church person or a faith person or Jesus person or a God person or whatever it is for you. You may not consider yourself much of that. And I'm not like saying you got to believe all those stories right now. We're all in a process. We're all different places in our faith and our understanding of what has happened in history. And that's not what we're here to discuss today. What we're here to discuss is Asaph believed those things and he passed them on to the next generation because he thought they were important. He thought they were important. He thought they were necessary information to pass on to the next generation. Verse 5, he decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law of Israel, which he commanded our forefathers to teach their children. So you got two things going on here. He says, we're going to tell them and we're going to teach them. We're going to tell them and we're going to teach them. We're going to tell them and we're going to teach them. We're going to tell them and we're going to teach them. Verse 6, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. So you got a couple of generations here. He's identified, actually, if you track with this, he's identified 4 generations. You got grandparents who tell their children, who grow up and tell their children, who grow up and tell their children. You've got 4 generations he's identified. The wonders and powers of what God has done, and the laws and the decrees that God has given his people, they want to pass that on. They want to tell them about it. They want to teach them about it. They want to tell them not just the laws, but where they came from and why they came about. They were providing a standard for living, not just a standard of living. None of this has to do with make sure that you get a good education first, make sure that you get a good job first, make sure that you then maybe get married and then make sure that you have grandbabies for me. They're not concerned as much about the process of the order of things here. They're concerned about, hey, listen, this is what God has done. This is what he's done for our people. That is how we have arrived here. And look, he passed on this information to us. He passed on these guidelines and these life rules to us. And it was born out of that relationship with God. And it's important. Then he says this in verse 7, then they would. So there's a result. And there's 3 things that would happen. Then they would put their trust in God, and they would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. Would keep his commands. So if we're going to help the next generation win, right, whatever that is, the people coming up behind us in some way, we need to do this. We need to provide them a standard for living rather than improving their standard of living. Provide for them a standard for living rather than improving their standard of living. Improving their standard of living is really just giving them better education, better skill sets, more marketable skill sets in their life so that they can go farther in business, in life, all that kind of stuff. And that's good. But if you've got talent without character, it's not going to work out well. It's not going to work out well. So providing them a standard for living is about building their character. When he talks about a standard for living, he talks about 3 things in this verse we just read in verse 7. He talks about trusting God. He talks about not forgetting what he has done and keeping his commands. Those are the 3 things he's talking about right here. What commands? In the Old Testament, we have like 600-something commands, right? There's a bunch of laws. And we've gone through an entire series talking about and boiling down what is at the root of all those laws. What is it that God is actually trying to say here through all of this? And we boiled down to one thing that we need to ask ourselves. And it is this: what does love require of me? So in any and every situation where we're unsure, we just need to ask, what does love require of me? What does love require, or what is the loving thing to do here? Listen, this is a big deal because some of you have come into a place and you've lived the first half of your life, and you've lived a decade or you've lived a period of time where it's been about you the most. where the center of your life was you. And it's been more of a self-centered type of life rather than an others first type of life. And today may be the day when you decide to turn your focus to others rather than yourself. And here's why. Because you realize that a life dedicated to yourself will only have yourself to show for yourself at the end of yourself. You may say that again, I think. You realize that a life dedicated to yourself will only have yourself to show for yourself at the end of yourself. You don't want your headstone to read something like this: he was all about himself. That'd be like the worst headstone. Or he got what he deserved. That'd be like the worst headstone. So when we choose to help the next gen win, we need to choose to be about others. And helping the next gen win, we need to choose to help in that scenario. We need to choose to help, choose to help, choose to help. It doesn't happen just naturally. You have to choose it. Here's what I know about every man, every woman in here, is that you and I were made to receive love and give love, not to receive love and keep love. We were made to receive love from God and give it out to others, not to receive love from God and go, God, thanks, and then not give it to anybody else. That's not how it works. We're not supposed to be cul-de-sacs where there's no outlet, where it just comes in the way it went out. Like it's like, okay, God, you love me. Thank you so much. I'm going to show you love. But really, as we've talked about before, the way we authenticate and show love to others and say, you know what, God really loves me, the way we authenticate that is really to love other people, especially when they're unlovable. So we need to choose to help. And you and I were made in the image of God to make a focus, to make a difference, rather, on our planet. And you and I will never make a difference when we're focused on our own lives only. We will make a difference when we turn toward others and choose to help the next gen win. Here's another thing that will help us when we decide to help the next gen win. We write it down. Write it down. Choose to help, write it down. Some of you don't feel like you've got anything worth writing down. You're like, I don't know, what would I write down? What do I write down? What do I do with what I write down? But here, let me show you something. My grandma took a writing course a few years ago, about 12 years ago, and she's 91 now, so she's got some years. And they gave her all sort of writing prompts and like, tell us about when you were, tell us about your favorite childhood memory and all this kind of stuff. And she wrote through this entire course just for fun, and then she made copies. She compiled it all, made copies for all her grandchildren. And here's my copy. This is my copy. It's got all her stuff in it, right? It's got all kinds of stuff. And all this is part of my family story. Part of it. And there's even somewhere in here, there's pictures and stuff, which is where I usually go, because I like pictures. And pictures and stuff. And what's amazing about this to me is that some of the information in here I would have never known. I would have never known how God interacted with a portion of my family in my family history if it wasn't written down. I would have never known some of the information in here. And she decided to write it down, and she decided to give us all a copy so that we could have a part of our family story, a part of how God moved in our family, of how he showed up in desperate times, or he showed up and made things right, or he did things in the lives of the people who've come before us. And you have no clue what this means to me, how important this is to me, to know these things. You need to be recording what God has done and writing it down or keeping a record somehow. You could create audio notes, you could create videos. I don't care how you record it, but you need to be putting it down somewhere so that others will have it. Someday you're going to lose your mind or you're going to lose your life. Someday, right? And you're going to wish you'd have told more things that God had done. So start keeping a record now. It can be a prayer book. It can be a story. It can be whatever you want, but start now because you want to pass it down. And you want people to know. You want people who come after you, especially in your family line, to know how God showed up when you weren't sure if he would. So if you got a couple of those stories in your life, if you got a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4, if you got a surgery you went through, if you got a relationship that was mended, if you got something that happened in your life and you're just like, wow, I can't believe God did that for me, write it down so that you can pass it on. And you need to pass it on. Not only that, but some of you have like a lot of stuff you should pass on, but you're not sure if you want to pass it on because it's not like a good example, it's a good bad example, right? It's like I lived this way and I shouldn't have, and this is the consequences that I still have from that. You need to put that down because we can learn from each other's mistakes, can't we? And that's something that we need to use to the benefit of the next generation. Here's kind of 5 categories that might help you when you think about writing something down or how God's shown up in your life. Here's 5 categories to think about. Life and self. Like think about your own life, your own self, your mental status, all that kind of stuff. Think about your marriage if you're married. Think about family, other family members. Think about your childhood. Think about how your parents related to you or how they communicated with you. Think about work. Think about church, any local church you've been involved in, anything God's done unique there or spectacular there. Think about those things and ask yourself, how has God shown up here? And what sort of things should I pass down as it relates to these categories? These 5 categories represent different aspects of life. And I recognize that some of us don't have one of those categories or 2 of those categories, but those are the 5 major categories of life that you should focus on. And it doesn't matter. Let me say this. It doesn't matter if you're a high schooler. It doesn't matter if you're college age, if you're young and single, if you're a single parent, if you're in your 60s and married. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in because there's always people coming up behind you, and you always have something to pass along and give to the next generation. Always. So, here's the third thing that we need to think about when we think about helping the next gen win. The first one was choose to help. Then it was write it down. Now it's be the vision. I heard a story recently, and be the vision really means be the example, be the model, be the vision. Recently I heard a story about a pastor who he buried his second grandchild in 2 years. Now, just think about how awful that would be for somebody, right? And here he is just trying to figure out how to wrap his head around life again and trying to understand, he's got his own doubts swirling and he's got his own stuff happening. And here he is and he's trying to lead this church or a part of this church, this ministry in this church. And, he's just not sure, like, if he can keep leading other people. He's like, what do I say? Like, I don't have any words. I'm hurting. What do I say? He turns to his wife, and he's kind of talking a little bit crazy. You know how you kind of get a little crazy when you're hurting and stuff? Your mind starts swirling, and he just starts saying things to his wife, and she's listening and trying to comfort him. And then he's like, how am I supposed to, share a vision of what God can do in your life when I'm just so broken right now? And she looks at him, and she says, you know what? You don't have to share a vision. You need to be a vision. And he's like, what do you mean? She said, you need to just show people what it's like for someone who is so broken, for someone who is hurting so much, for somebody who is questioning everything and could really just cut off their belief. You need to show people what it's like to trust anyways and to keep moving forward and to continue to attach yourself to the promises of God despite what's happening around you. You need to show people. You need to be that vision. You don't have to say anything. Just be that vision. Be that vision. Be the example. And so he did that. And it was in the darkest times of his life that he had to do that. And some of you here today might be somewhere in that mix. You might have just hurt. You might have just heartache. You might just have doubt swirling. You might just have you're not sure about anything anymore. We all have those moments, seasons, or even years. But you need to be the vision for your family and your friends. Be the vision. You don't have to answer all those questions. You just need to be the vision of what's like to stay faithful through the storm. and attach yourself to the anchor of Christ and his promises despite the storm that's around you, because that's the only thing that's going to anchor you. It's the only thing that's going to make sure that even if your boat is rocking through this stormy sea, you'll find yourself on the other side of the storm. It's to anchor yourself to the promises of God, to the person of Jesus Christ. And you need to be the vision. You need to put your faith in that firm foundation. When faced with unspeakable circumstances, you don't have to verbalize the vision of what it's like to follow Christ. You just need to be the vision. Just be it. So if you want to help the next generation win, if you want to help the next gen win, you need to choose to help. You need to write it down. You need to be the vision. I know that you may not understand what hangs in the balance of your decision to do those things. But let me tell you, it could be an entire family tree. It could be. It could be an entire family tree. It could be the generations coming behind you. Or it could be somebody else's family tree because you have that kind of influence in their family. I want to share with you a story. The story it's of a young man named Joe. And Joe was a student in the student ministry at the last church that I was at in Santa Rosa. And to help tell his story, we made a little video for him a long time ago. So this is going to be a little rough, but I'm going to show you a portion of that video so that you understand what I'm talking about.
Joe Sanavi, and just turned 18 years old in January 18th. I was born with something called cystic fibrosis, which is mostly affects my lungs and stuff, so it makes it harder to do a lot of activities, physical activities, and day-to-day life. Occasionally I'll have to go into the hospital for a tune-up with some antibiotics, and it can really start to wear me down. It takes a lot of motivation and support from your friends and family to not just want to give up. About the average life expectancy is probably mid-30s to 40s, and that's if you're taking pretty good care of yourself. But with the support of my youth pastors, Micah, Grant, Seth, all you guys, Patrick, I know that God is working, and he has a plan for what's going on. A few months back, I really felt an urge to dedicate myself to the Lord and just show everyone that I'm proud to be a Christian. Every Sunday morning, I help out doing PowerPoint for the younger kids services, writing the songs, writing the slideshows. Really, anywhere else they need me to help out.
So here's a kid who's born with a terminal illness, cystic fibrosis. Only thing they can do is lengthen his life. And he decides to help the next gen win. He decides, you know what? I may only have 30 or 40 years, but I'm going to spend a lot of my time investing in the next generation. I'm going to spend my time making sure that these kids have someone just to run their computer in their environment. I want to make sure that I can help the local church in any way that I can because I believe Jesus is my Savior. He knew Jesus would not most likely heal his temporary situation, but now we can say that he is healed completely because just a little after this, we were doing his funeral and we were showing this. And Joe was celebrating in heaven. And there's a bunch of kids who are winning because of his investment. Here's what Joe taught me. Your circumstances might be absolutely horrible. And you might have time more than you would ever want in the hospital. At any moment, you could go there. Your health or your wealth might be horrible. But if you just live to be the vision of what it looks like to trust despite your circumstances, you might just be helping the next gen win, and you won't even know it. Joe was doing that from about the age of 15 or 16, and he was only able to do it for a few years until he went home. Guys, he knew what was up. He wasn't perfect. He's a teenager, right? He makes his own mistakes and that sort of stuff. But he decided, I'm going to invest. I'm going to invest. I'm not going to waste my life. I'm going to use it. I think the problem with some of us is we think our life is going to be longer than it might be. And so we waste time. We waste time. We waste time. If we would just realize all we're promised is today. So use it to invest in the next gen for the sake of the next generation and the sake of the kingdom of God. That's what's up. Joe left a mark. And we need you to do the same in our two cities. We need you to do the same in our church. We need you to invest in the next generation. And if you want to help the next generation win, remember this. You need to provide them a standard for living rather than improving their standard of living. Can we do that together? Can we do that together? Can we make an impact on our Wombaland, on our Upstreet, on our Inside Out students? Can we impact our own families, our nieces, our nephews? Can we impact our neighbors? There's someone coming up behind you that needs you. You just need to choose to help. You need to write it down, and you need to be the vision. Not only will you be helping the next gen win, but you and I will win in the process, because that's what we were made to do. Will you join us on that journey? Will you join us on that journey? If yes, if you say yes, if you already do this, I want to challenge you to keep that going. I want to challenge you to keep that going. Like, keep investing, keep pouring your life into other people. Do not give in to the gravitational pull to be a person that is selfish in their life. Do not, I plead with you, I beg you, do not be about yourself. Do not be about yourself. Be about others. That is the love of Christ. Be about other people. Others first. I beg you, I implore you. You have no idea what's at stake. And if you don't already do this, if you don't invest in the next generation in your own family, start. Be on purpose. Be on purpose. Choose to help them. Write it down. Be the vision for your family, for anyone you have influence over, in your job, in your marriage, in your community, in your neighborhood, in your church. Be those things. One particular way that you could really, really, really apply this right now is that we as a church have a need for people during the summer specifically to step up and just say, you know what? I'll serve once or twice over in children's ministry, because we have a lot of people who serve all year, and they serve every week or every other week, and they serve continually, and then they take, some people need breaks during the summer, so we give breaks, and they continue to come back year after year and do that same thing in the school year, and we need more people to come help give breaks for those people. I got to tell you, this week, we had a real big challenge to make sure we had enough adults and volunteers for our children's ministry, and it broke my heart, because I was like, man, those kids mean so much to me. Many of us have kids in there. We want to make sure that we have a quality environment, that we're investing in them, we're helping them win, and we need some of you to say, you know what, I can do a week or two. We need you to do that, okay? And if you're thinking, oh, that's not for me, that's who I'm talking to, okay? If anybody in here is like, that's not for me, I'm talking to you, okay? So we need you to do that, because we need to make sure that we're investing in our next generation so that they can win, so that they can win. In a lot of ways, what is taught in the next two rooms is more important than what's being taught in here. because that's going to last longer. That's going to be longer. That's going to influence farther in there. Many of us are set in our ways. They're moldable, and we need you to help mold them. We need you to help mold them. So we need you. The kids, they need you. And you don't know it yet, but you need it too. You need it too. So today, I want you to consider that. But beyond that, beyond the immediate need here, I need you to consider that in your neighborhoods, in your families, in your friends' families, with your nephews and nieces, with anybody who's coming up behind you in any season of life, at work. You need to be passing on something to them that is important. You need to be passing on wisdom. You need to be passing on character. You need to choose to help. You need to write it down. You need to be the vision. So if you want to help a couple of Sundays this summer, we would really love that. We would really love for you to be a part of that. I think you would really enjoy it. And you could just see me after the service and say, hey, I can help a couple of Sundays. And we can get you connected in that way. And we would love for you to connect because you just have no idea what hangs in the balance of you saying yes to help the next gen win. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for helping us win and helping generation after generation after generation after generation of people who are trying to follow you and pursue you win. Lord, I pray that we could be the vision for other people, that we would decide to pass on what you've given us, that we would be like Joe in that video, that we would say, you know what, I've only got a short window. My life is only so long. I'm going to be about other people and not about myself. I'm going to invest in other people because when I do that, I pass on your love and I authenticate my love for you, God. We thank you for the opportunity you've given us to influence people. God, I just pray that you would give us more and more opportunity and that we would take that and have the courage to do that because you are King of everything, God. And we surrender to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you guys. We'll see you next week for part 2, helping the next gen win.